Okay, I'm back again, and I'm going to read the last half of chapter 14, the ending of the Memoirs of Princess Alice, the Duchess of Gloucester. And in here, she does some true. She had just finished up, her and Henry were in an accident. She just finished up recovering from the accident, and in it, I'm going to show you here is a picture of Henry, and that is Prince William. And this here is Richard. He still has the same face, so that's pretty cute. But in here are pictures of Prince William, the other Prince William, and he had gone on to Cambridge, and he studied. He was a pilot, and he was at the time the sixth in line to the throne. And he was stepping up on his royal duties and helping out, Queen Elizabeth. They were cousins and they were quite close in age. Richard and William were close in age. And I even have a picture here that shows you that they were the older cousins. Somewhere in here I have a picture. They were the older cousins. And as you can see in here, let me just exit that out. Over here, I've shown this before. You might be able to find that on Google somewhere, Google Images, but there's Prince William. Behind him is Prince Richard. You see Prince Charles, and you see Princess Anne. They were very close in age, all born in the 40s. Anne and Charles were born in the end of the 40s, and this is in Sandringham in the snow. So, but anyways, I want to bring up a picture of Prince William so you can see pictures of him while I read. It's very interesting. There's a very interesting documentary out on YouTube about the other Prince William, and it explains his story and his sad and tragic death in a airplane accident. So anyways, here we go. Okay, here they're heading off to Australia. On the day of the Great Parade at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, everybody had already left for the ceremony when Prince Henry, who was sitting waiting for Amos to pull his boots on, suddenly said, "I can't get up." I opened a window, hoping he just felt faint from the heat, and somehow Amos and I managed to support him downstairs. We ran around to the car by the garden door rather than through the house, so as to get some fresh air and avoid the staff who were lining the passage. I was most worried, but clearly we had to carry on and hope for the best. Once in the car, the chauffeur had to drive very fast to make up time, and this, I think, helped. At one point, we swerved violently to avoid a woman with a pram, which made Prince Henry so angry he quite recovered. I suppose he was in a daze after what must have been a mild stroke, and his sudden irritation with the chauffeur snapped him out of it. I was still anxious about him when we arrived, because looking down on a lot of steps always made him dizzy, and this was the position he was going to have to maintain for the endless march past. I warned the Governor General, Lord Delisle, to help keep a watchful eye on him. Fortunately, all went to plan, and there was no further mishap. I often wonder how I managed to compete in those 5 weeks with my arm in plaster from shoulder to wrist and somewhat wobbly knees. People seemed to enjoy helping me along, cutting up my food for me, etc., Unfortunately, as a result of my exertions, I suffered later that spring from delayed concussion, which worried me not a little till the doctor explained to me what was wrong. Apart from a visit the following year to Malaysia, Singapore, and Borneo, when Prince Henry's health was even more precarious, this was the, this was the last official visit abroad that we were to conduct together. In the summer of 1965, William was posted as the third secretary on the staff of the High Commission in Lagos. During his appointment, I went out to see him. He planned to take me on a tour of favorite spots in his sports car, but unfortunately, just as we were about to set off, a civil war broke out again. Instead of having leave, William found himself extra busy at the office. The event could not have happened more dramatically. Even the High Commissioner's wife only discovered about it when she went to the airport to meet her children coming out for the holiday, and she saw soldiers hustling people off at gunpoint in all directions. She grabbed the children and hurried home with the news. The Americans sent a ship to take away their people, which set the British business community grumbling that nobody was looking after them. The High Commissioner, Sir Francis Cumming Bruce, thought it would be a good idea in these circumstances to give a garden party in my honor so as to show that even I had not been taken home. The only sign of change I noticed was the sudden absence of my Nigerian security officer. He'd been a dreadful bore, always squeezing himself in whenever I went, and quite unnecessarily he was over attentive. But as soon as the emergency had declared, he vanished. The day I left, he rushed up with a hand outstretched, as ingratiating and self-important as ever, no doubt hoping for a large tip, but I paid no attention. Early in the new year, we had the second of 3 visits to a runway bay in Jamaica. We had to change planes at Kennedy Airport, and the Duke of Windsor took advantage of this interlude to come out from New York to see us. In spite of all that happened, the brothers were very good friends and really pleased to meet each other. This was to be the last time they did. Richard and his friends decided to give a dance at Cambridge in the end of May week that year. They applied too late to get a suitable room, so Richard asked if they could hold it in the lovely old barn in the stable yard at Barnwell. I agreed, on condition that the house itself was roped off so that Prince Henry would not be disturbed. There was an open-air film on the castle wall, and bands played in 3 different places. At about 11 p.m., my lady-in-waiting and I took a stroll to see what was going on. There were some odd noises coming from the swimming pools, so we investigated and found the only person there was one young rock musician playing some instrument. "Oh dear, has it gone wrong?" I asked, hoping to comfort him, as he looked indignant and replied, Nothing has gone wrong. It's meant to be like that." During our tour, we also came across a young girl dressed like a pre-war debutante. She was in a beautiful ball gown with long white gloves and pearls. Her mother had obviously assumed it would be a royal occasion and made her daughter dress accordingly. I felt very sorry for the poor girl because, of course, it could not have been a more informal party. Straw bales served as tables and chairs, and most people appeared to be dressed in a motley collection of their grandparents' clothes. There were ancient uniforms being very popular at the time. Princess Anne came to stay with us for the occasion. I think it was her first party away from the home, and I doubt if she has been to another in the least like it. At about 4 a.m., as the sun was getting up, I woke to the sound of cuckoos. It was as if every cuckoo in North Hampshire had gathered to try to drown the noise of the band that was still pounding away in the distance. Looking out my window, I saw several Arabs floating around in white playing croquet, which completely completed the strangeness of the moment. Some of the guests parked themselves in tents and caravans in a field beyond the stables. And for the next month or so, when weeding the garden, I would find glasses and beer cans among the shrubs and plants. That was a party. By the end of the 1968, further strokes had made Prince Henry a complete invalid. I would walk, I would talk to him, hoping he could hear and understand, or show him photographs of things I thought would interest him. I also read him letters, though I was never quite sure how much he took in. The great thing was to give him comfort knowing someone was there. Accordingly, we always ensured that someone was sitting with him. If not the nurse, then myself or Miss Holland, or my lady in waiting, or Lady Seton, or my secretary at Barnwell, and of course Amos and Prater. I used to ask his old friends to stay as well, so that he could at least see that they were still about. Another person who used to come and sit with him was Miss Saxby, the retired matron of King Edward VII's hospital. She was a great admirer of Prince Henry from the days when he had been her president at the King Edward's. Every day, weather permitting, he would be driven on a tour of the farms in a minimook fitted with special comfortable seat. This was now his greatest pleasure. He would be accompanied by me and all the dogs if I was available, otherwise by Sister Anne, his nurse. A curious thing once happened. The parrot William had brought back from Nigeria suddenly jumped off her cage and onto the floor and looked as if she might be eaten up by Holly, one of the Labradors, who advanced upon her. To my astonishment, Prince Henry, who was unable to speak, shouted the dog's name. I asked his doctor how this could happen. He said it was because the fright side of the brain is different from the speech side of the brain. I had to carry out some of Prince Henry's public commitments. As I never liked to leave him for long, this meant much traveling back and forth from Barnwell. William helpfully resigned from the Foreign Service. He was needed to run the estate and also thought it was time he took up some of his father's official responsibilities. Up until then, it had not been easy for him to decide what best to do. As parents, we could never quite make out whether our children were supposed to lead royal lives at the command of the Queen or were free to follow professional careers of their choice. Somehow it became clear that William would inherit Prince Henry's duties with the title and that Richard could do what he liked, which was why he became an architect. As it turned out, Richard's architectural experience had to be abandoned. He had a successful career practice when he inherited the dukedom, and he had proved very useful in the exercise of his public duties. William returned in 1970. He had been abroad for so long, in America, in Africa, and finally in Japan, and his leaves had been so short that I felt I had hardly known him as a grown-up man. The sad thing was that after his return, I still saw much less of him than I'd hoped, because even in the evenings when we might have taken a stroll together with the dogs, I might have watched him at polo, I invariably had to be with Prince Henry so that the nurse could take some time off. It was a month before William's death. Richard married Brigitte Van Doors. The wedding took place at Barnwell rather than at Brigitte's home in Denmark, so that Prince Henry could be present, at least for the reception. The Queen Mother and Princess Margaret were among those who came. and William was the best man. Prince Henry took part in the reception as far as he was able to, looking on from his wheelchair in the drawing room. A month or so before the wedding of Richard and Brigitte, I had joined William in Kenya for a brief and happy holiday. I stayed at the Deloraine while they traveled around the country. I think William would have married quite soon himself had he lived. I do not think he really wanted to marry before, and consequently had found it safer to have girlfriends who tended to be older than himself and already married. When he came back, he was resigned to leading a more settled life, doing whatever the Queen had expected of him. I'm sure he would have married a suitable girl in due course. He was always such a restless, active person, and I have often wondered if he'd had some premonition that his life was destined to be short. I was at Barnwell the day his plane crashed. He was taking part in an air race up north. One of the other competitors flew straight over with the news as soon as it happened. He was in a terrible state, having been a staunch friend of my son. I never knew whether to tell Prince Henry or not, but I think he understood from watching the television. I was completely stunned and have never been quite the same since. Though I have tried to persuade myself that it was better to have known and lost him than to never have known him at all. At this time, Princess Alice, in bed with a bad cough, happened to be with us for her annual visit to Barnwell. No one could have been more of a comfort to me than her at such a time. When in South Africa, she had received news that her son Rupert Tremerton had been badly hurt in a car accident while touring with a friend in France. It would have taken 2 to 3 weeks to reach him, traveling by boat and train. He died within a few days. I realized she knew only too well how I was feeling. I cried by her bedside, and we said some prayers together. I then went for a long walk with Richard, Brigitte, and the dogs. There seemed nothing better to do. On our return, I found my oldest cousin, Sir David Scott, had driven over from Boughton with a letter of sympathy, having heard the news on his television. His only son had been killed in the army in North Africa at the age of 19. His letter brought to my mind many friends who had suffered likewise and had been so brave and uncomplaining. Letters of condolence were overwhelming. I realized, though, that through them, sympathy is a great or even is even deeper than love or admiration. William was always so bold and adventurous that even if he had not killed himself flying, it might have been something else in some other way. There is a commemorative plaque in the church at Barnwell, and another one put up by the locals in the church of Little Staffordshire village where the accident happened. There's also an oak tree planted on the spot. They asked us not to have a memorial there because it would have caused a traffic jam at a rather dangerous corner of the road. I had had a great number of interesting letters from William, and some were incorporated into a book of memoirs written by his friends and edited by Giles and St. Aubin, who had taught him history at Eton. The last years of Prince Henry's life caused much distress and concern to me and my sons, and to Prince Henry many friends and relations. And to Prince Henry's many friends and relations, there was little anyone could do except to give him every attention and comfort as possible. Help in this way came from Sister Anne Grayville, an Irish nurse, who was recommended to us by Alex Saxby. Sister Anne tended him with great devotion, and with her sense of fun could make him smile and laugh and look quite happy at times. She became almost as one of the family during those 7 years, and like us, she was to suffer a sad loss. Her younger sister was killed in a car accident in Ireland. She made friends with a New Zealander who was helping us in our dairy. They married, and after Prince Henry's death, went to went to farm in Ireland. It was a great relief to me to be able to leave Prince Henry in such a safekeeping while I went off on my many public arrangements. When the York House was taken over by the Lord Chamberlain's office in 1970, the Queen had most kindly offered me that part of Kensington Palace lately occupied by Princess Marina, the Duchess of Kent. Moving from one home to another was quite an undertaking, and it added to my already complicated life. It seemed strange having a house filled with my husband's belongings, and yet now he was unable to see it and be there with me. I tried to tell him all about it, but he took no interest. I suppose he was incapable of caring by then. When Prince William returned home from Japan in 1970, he had his own rooms and stayed there when not abroad or at Barnwell. Richard at this time had his own house in Camden near his office. I stayed in London a short time as possible and only when necessary for official functions. A visit to Japan during the 2 years that William was in Tokyo as second secretary with our embassy was something I much wanted to do, but I dared not leave Prince Henry for the length of time necessary to make the journey worthwhile. Some consolation at this time was that his illness forced me to rest while sitting with him during the nurse's time off, and it enabled me a great deal of embroidery, which I enjoyed very much. I also found some sort of peaceful happiness driving around the farm with him and all the dogs, while the surrounding scenery changed each year from brown to green and finally to gold. When the harvest time arrived and the great machines went back and forth, we would sit and watch for ages. It seemed to please and satisfy Prince Henry, and in some strange way I also found it soothing. He died 2 years after William on the 10th of June, 1974. Well, that's Prince William. I'll show you pictures of. And there's Henry and William and Richard again. So, and that is the end of chapter 14. Alice was such a dedicated wife, a dedicated duchess, a dedicated mother. I mean, it's quite a life that she had, but also such a good, stable, wonderful figure for Prince Henry. So I'm going to end, and the last section is the epilogue. I would like to read the epilogue. I know some people don't, but the epilogue is another section. It's only a couple of pages, and it just wraps everything up so nicely.